Hey, what is going on, everybody? Bauer Brown here. Welcome back to the channel, guys, and welcome to another exciting video about how to do things in Blender. All right, seriously. What we're going to do is we're going to continue texturing. Okay, so as you can see, I have the garage that we built. Hopefully, you saved yours because you're going to need it for this video. But we're going to continue texturing this. Now, if you recall in the last video, I know it was a little while ago. I'm slacking. It's okay though. But we did do a brick wall. We textured a brick wall, and in that wall, we used a single texture. It was a single brick texture, single concrete. This is going to be a little bit different. We're going to be using texture atlases, and hopefully everybody remembers what that was, a texture atlas, and where to find it in the base game. So we will be working with just base game textures. In a future video, I will show you how to incorporate third-party textures like PBRs, something you may have downloaded from the internet. Very simple process. There's not much to it. So let's jump right into getting this textured. All right. So like I said, we're looking at the garage here. First thing we want to do is we want to get over to the base game textures. Okay. So like I said, it's a base game folder. So I'm in the farming simulator, data maps, map US, or whichever map you want, Alpine, French map, and then textures. The thing to remember with the textures, okay, I did state this in one of the earlier videos. The Alpine map does not have the parallax occlusion. Okay, it doesn't work with parallax occlusion. It doesn't have height maps. I believe it's just the height maps it doesn't have with it. But you're good to go with the French map and the US map. It has all that stuff. So if you're looking to use height maps and parallax occlusion, you are good to go with those two maps, the US and the French, or the textures, as I say, not the maps. Okay. So from here, it's pretty simple. It's just picking a texture that's going to work for us. Okay. So looking at the model, obviously we need some kind of shingles. We need a roof, a roof texture. We need bricks. I want to do brick down bottom here, and then some kind of like paneling or wall texture. Okay, it's going to be completely up to you. It's your model, however you want it to look. Those are the textures that you're going to pick, obviously. All right, so let's get in here and see if we can find something that kind of covers every base, right? It has, maybe brick, it has a little bit of siding, and it has, what else did I need? The wall texture. Well, the siding, the brick, and the shingles. Okay. And sometimes you can't find it. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you like a certain brick on one texture and you like the shingles from another, and that's fine, right? So we can apply more than one material, and we can work with multiple textures. That's not a problem, obviously. The one thing I did do differently since the last video I had a standalone DDS viewer installed. This video, I got rid of that and I just kind of opted to go with paint.net. For some reason, the DDS viewer seemed like it was taking a while to load, and I don't know, I just wasn't super psyched about that. So I kind of ditched that and we went with paint.net, because paint.net seems like it loads just as fast or faster. It seems like it loads faster than the standalone DDS viewer. Sorry, I'm a little distracted here trying to figure out which texture works the best for me. Probably should have figured this one out ahead of time. Let's see here. Now, the roof doesn't necessarily need to be shingles. It could be, there's a lot of tin roofs, you'll notice, right? So what we'll have a look at this. We'll open this with paint.net, and then we'll have a quick look and see maybe if this is what we're looking for. So we have the brick, sort of a roof material. Not much for siding though. So I could always use a separate texture for that. That's not a big deal, but let's just kind of continue on here and see if we can find some. A good place to look. Now I notice I use these old barn materials a lot, depending on what you're working on. But if you look in, let's see here, residential houses, you go down to residential, and these usually have everything that you need, right? So if we look at this residential house 01, right? Let me open that with paint.net. Okay, you'll see that I have the brick, I have some kind of siding, I have shingles. I got basically everything I need in this residential 01. So I think we found the winner, right? Normally, like I try to pick a certain look for whatever I'm working on, but since this is just a tutorial and it's really not that imperative that I get exactly the look that I'm going for. there's a good chance I could use this in one of my maps, but we shall see. All right, so like I said, now we know that we have one texture atlas that's going to cover pretty much most of my needs. Let's go into material, right? And I'm going to rename this material. Now if you recall, this is the base game material, or not the base game, the default material. I'm sorry. Now that default material covers everything, the entire object, right? Every face, the walls, the doors, everything, the windows are all part of this material. All right. So if you have multiple materials going, I guess it doesn't really matter. Normally, what I do is if I have multiple textures, not multiple materials, what I'll do is I'll pick the biggest area, like say maybe it's the roof or it's the walls or something like that, and that's what I will make this default material. And then I'll start breaking it down with additional materials and textures and dividing it up. Right. So I still use this one here. But what I do is I will rename this, we can call it residential 01. And in this way, I know which material I worked with, right? Because there's a lot of, or which texture I worked with. I'm sorry. There's a lot of textures inside of this base game, right? So when you're in here and you've got, many different materials going on and you got lots of different textures, it's easy to forget which texture you're working with. So that's the way I keep track of that is I just name my material after the texture atlas that I'm working with. And it's, like I said, just much easier to keep track of. All right, so now we can go into shading. We want to give this assign the image files, right? And we're going to be using Node Wrangler for that. So hopefully everybody has Node Wrangler installed. It simplifies the process like tenfold. All right, so we're going to go Shift, Control, and T. All right, and that's after when I do the Shift, Control, T. Make sure when you do that, you have to have this principled BSDF. You have to have that highlighted. So click on that, make sure that white outline comes up, and then it's Shift, Control, T. Okay. And then from there, we're just going to navigate over to, let's see here. We're going to navigate to our Farm Sim folder, which is right here. I'm going to Data, Maps, Map US, Textures, and then we are looking for Residential 01. That's the texture we're going to use. So we're down here somewhere. Let's scroll a little ways. Okay, here we go. Residential House 01. Yep. There's the diffuse. We got the height map, normal map, specular map, and that's all we need. Okay, and we'll assign those. All right, so you can see it assigned it to the entire building, which is not a big deal. We can work with that. Let's get back over here to our UV editing window. Now, the texture that I picked, for some reason, it has the height map listed, but we just come to this little drop-down box here, this image, and we'll just pick the diffuse out of there because that's what we need for the image so we can get everything going here. All right, and from here, it's simple enough, right? So let's get into face select, and we will select our roof here. That'll be the first thing we do. Sometimes you cannot work on both sides at once like this. You have to break it down into multiple sides. So let's see what happens here if we unwrap that, and that's a right click and a quick UU. Now you'll notice nothing is showing up on my model here, and that's because I'm not in the right visualization mode. I guess if that's the right word for it. You want to get in here to viewport shade, the shading mode. You want to get into material preview, and that'll show you what you're doing there. All right, so things are going to have to be rotated here a little bit. So hovering over my UV editor, I'm going to hit A for select all, and R90, that's going to rotate those textures for me. I think they went the wrong way. The problem I see happening right now, and let's do this right here. I'll show you with what's going on. I'm going to move this upwards into my shingles, okay? And you can see that on this side of the roof, shingles are looking like they're going in the right direction. On this side, they are not. So it's going to need to be separated. What you could do is keep things right where it's at, how I moved it up, and just pick the side that's heading in the wrong direction. All right, and just rotate just that side. Oops, I only reversed it 90 degrees. I want to reverse that, or rotate it, not reverse it, 180 degrees. Okay. And that looks pretty good. So just that easily, our roof is already done. Okay, we'll need something for the underside, but I'll figure that out in a little bit. All right, let's get this brickwork taken care of here. So let's grab the bricks and get those assigned. Sometimes it's easier if I hit controls. Well, for me, it's actually it's for everybody. Alternate Z, Alt Z will get you into this like not a wireframe mode. It's kind of like a 3D X-ray. That's what I want to call it. Not 3D. Get you into like a X-ray vision where it makes it easier to pick objects sometimes. If you're picking multiple objects or objects that are a bit more complicated. If not, I would be in here and I'd have to pick everything like by hand. I'd have to get underneath here and select this face. And then I have to rotate up to the top here, select that face. Sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes that's exactly what you have to do, but not every time. And you can see how much of a pain it is sometimes to do all of these that way. So I tend to do that. Alt Z, get myself into this like X-ray mode. You could, if you want to, go into a straight wireframe, which is a little bit easier sometimes because you're not being confused by the rest of the geometry that's inside of there. And then it makes it easier to select what you want. So looks like I have everything, and that's going to be my brick. Okay, easy enough. So we're going to right click and then U. Okay, and that looks a little all over the place there. You can see how zigzaggy it is. It's just not straight. All right. So to correct this, now you notice I didn't unwrap anything also. So that's kind of making a difference for what's going on here. But for the sake of speeding this up, I'm going to just try to go into unwrap, and I'm going to do that into UV Smart Project. Okay, and that's U and an S for Smart Project. Click OK, select all. And then we are going to grab that and move that up into our bricks like so. Okay, and that's not looking too good there. All right, so we're going to have to do this the hard way. It's not necessarily the hard way. What we could do is just unwrap this. And hopefully you remember how to do that with unwrapping. What I'm going to try and do is cheat for the sake of this video because I do have tools to help me for unwrapping. Now, you do have to be in face select, right? So I'm going to go to unwrap faces. I'm going to go to unwrap me. Okay, and then I'm just going to go to grow charts, click OK. Now that unwrapped my entire house, which is not a big deal. But what I do want to do is see if it'll give me a better result on this brickwork here. And it doesn't seem like it really is. Kinda. All right. So from here, like I said, if you didn't want to unwrap everything, let's try it another way. Let's back this up, get myself out of the unwrap me. Okay. What you could do is we'll start with these bricks here because that's the most important, right? And we don't necessarily have to unwrap this because it doesn't make a continuous loop. So it's almost, there's a break in it. So it's sort of already unwrapped a little bit. Probably what I should have done is put another line inside of here so I can keep that brickwork going. Let's take care of that really quickly. Let's get into our knife tool. All right. And we're just going to extend that line so I can continue that brickwork on the inside of this door frame here. Like so. All right. Now we can include these faces in our brickwork as well. Okay. And materials are default, or not default, but our residential materials. So let's try that. Let's right click UU. We may be okay with this. All right. So we're going to go over to our UV editing window, and we're going to rotate that 90 degrees, move it up into our bricks. Have a look at what we have. Okay, it looks pretty good except for these inside faces here that I just did for some reason are all the way down bottom there. So let's grab those and move those up. See what it looks like. All right. I'm just going to scale that up just a tiny bit. Like I said, in some instances, you can get away with not having it wrap all the way around. Like you can see this wraps around pretty decently. Now, I guess if you wanted to, you can select them all again and give it a shot and see if we can get it to wrap around in one piece. But with bricks are a lot easier to get away with. Certain textures you'll find you can get away with not unwrapping or just doing the faces individually. And then other textures you find it's not so easy. Okay, so the one thing that you may have noticed by now, okay, and that looks pretty good actually, is that this texture up here, you can see how when I UV unwrapped it, right? So my face is here, or the representation of my faces goes well outside of that texture. Now, the way the texture atlases work is from top to bottom, right? If I was to move this down, okay, see, I can't go up and down. I can't go outside of that texture area, but left to right, I can. It's tileable, right? So it continues basically infinitely to the left and to the right. Okay. So you don't have to worry about going outside of that texture for left or right. So it helps you tremendously when you're trying to scale items. When you're confined to just this little area, this little, the texture box here, where the physical representation, I guess. I'm not sure how I want to say it. Uh, but the texture itself, this little square area here, if you're confined to just that area, it makes things much more difficult. Sometimes things aren't scaled correctly. And if you need to rescale them, you can only go so far before you're exceeding the limits of that texture. But when you're able to go outside of those bounds to the left and to the right, and you can see in this case, it helped me tremendously, right? I was able to take all of those faces, unwrap them in one fell swoop, and I got my brick texture done there. Now I have this little bit of a runner up top here. I also want to highlight this little this piece here, okay? Because that's also going to get a brick texture. I'm not sure if that continues in there or not. Let's see here. I would think that it would. No, apparently it does not. It seems kind of odd for some reason. Oh, I see. It's butting up against the door jamb here. Okay. Okay, let's finish picking these. And you can see how much that helps that alternate Z, or for me Shift Z, but I Shift Z for me is a shortcut. I assigned a shortcut to the wireframe mode. And if you cannot figure out how to get into the wireframe, it's just up here, this viewport shading. Okay. So Shift Z gets me in and out of there. Alternate Z for everybody gets you in and out of this. I don't know what that would be. I guess it would be, what is this? X-ray. It's an X-ray mode. Like I said, it's extremely helpful. You just need to watch what's on the other side of you, because you will pick right through items. You can see that I just picked something up top of here, right? I went right through it and I picked something on the other side. And I'm just checking to make sure that I'm getting everything underneath that. All right, so let's get out of the X-ray and just visually inspect to make sure I've got everything. Now, this may not unwrap quite as smoothly as the bottom section did, but let's give it a shot. Let's see what we get. Okay, right click UU. Not sure that looks that great, honestly. Let's spin it 90 degrees, move it up, see what we got there. Yeah, you can see here, kind of goes on that angle. Everything looked a little skewed and a little wonky. Didn't look quite right. All right. You can try UV project. That's usually my default, like go-to. It's my standby is I try UV project if things don't work quite the way I want it to. And then I can just kind of just check things out. And in this case, obviously, it did not work the way I wanted it to. So let's try just these bricks here. Let's see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to exclude the top and the bottom. Yeah, I goofed up on that corner there. I had to patch it together. Not usually the way I like to do it. I like to extrude along normals, and it extrudes as all in one piece. But while I was away from you guys, I don't know, I goofed something up and quickly tried to fix it that way, and may not have been the best approach to fixing that. All right, so that looks better. The only problem is I think I might want those bricks facing the other direction. Maybe do I? And it helps break it up a little bit. And if you can see what I mean, like let's rotate that 90. See me see how the bricks look in let me see this area here. That's what I wanted, like the shorter side of the brick. And if you wanted to do that, see now how this is one long face, scaling it, it may not be that easy, right? So when I scale this down to fit, because remember, I can't exceed the top and the bottom, and I have to look to see if that falls within. And actually, that's not too bad. That falls within my limits there as far as scaling. But that was a shorter side, so let's try a longer side because obviously, the more I zoom in, the more that's going to the bigger that texture is going to look. All right, so let's try to and you want to scale the whole object. You're not just doing like scale along the z axis because that'll warp your image. Your image won't look as good, right? It'll start to warp because of zooming it in that way. All right, so you can see that doing these individually really not such a big deal. Whatever it takes basically to get the look that you're going for. Now this is going to have to be zoomed in quite a bit here. What did I do there? Okay, might be a bit much. I get myself on an angle where I can compare the two and I can see if it's big enough, not big enough. And then I just need to move that actually left or right and get rid of that line. All right, we'll try that. It's good enough for now. On bigger projects, this can really take a few minutes to get all of this done. So just be forewarned that this seems to be this is actually the hard way of doing things. If you guys are interested in Substance Painter, I can show you some things with Substance Painter. Now it's an Adobe product and it is on a subscription plan. Unfortunately, it's not, and nothing Adobe is cheap. I'm sure everybody knows that by now. Now I do use Photoshop. Actually, I have their full suite, uh, but at a price. It's not it's not free. But I know they do have like photography plans, which you can get Photoshop and Lightroom. I believe you can get those two for maybe $20 a month. It used to be 10. I believe I paid for it initially, but I think it's 20 now. The entire Adobe suite you can get for around $60. Substance Painter, you can get Substance Painter, Substance Designer, and there's another one. I can't remember what it is, but that's about $20 a month. And I have all of them. So yeah, I know. Shame on me. I'm paying more than I should every month for software. But anyhow, you can go on to Steam, and I'll show you this sometime later. But you can go on to Steam and you can buy like a perpetual license, right? So you can get a license. Like if you buy a Substance Painter today, right now you're locked into that version. You're locked into the 2023 version or 2024, whatever version they happen to be on. You're locked into that indefinitely. You won't pass this year. You won't get any more updates. So when they switch to 2025 or the next version, you won't get the update. You'll still be working on that older version. But honestly, with Substance Painter, there's not too many bells and whistles. Not too many things change with that. Myself, I thought about actually jumping back to an older version or going with that perpetual license. The only reason I don't is because with my plan, I get a lot of every month I get, I don't know, like I think like 30 free substances, which comes in, or materials, which comes in really handy because some of them are really, really nice. Obviously, I get unlimited updates and a few other perks. There's definitely some perks to being on a subscription plan. So that's why I choose to use Substance Painter. But anyhow, my point was texturing in Substance Painter is way easier than what we're doing here. There's a little more setup involved. You know, you definitely got to put some more work into getting things set up correctly, but it's much easier, much faster too. I mean, the setup might be a little bit slower, but in the end, the look itself, the finished product is well worth the effort. And like I'll show you guys some examples of these as we go here. Let me move this up here a little bit, scale it. I'm trying to speed up the process here a little bit. So things may not look as perfect as I would normally make them. That's okay though. I'm spending a little bit of time talking here, and I know I shouldn't be. I should just be getting things done. And what I want to do is I'm just trying to sneak a look here at this top runner. I'm going to leave it. Like I said, for the sake of this tutorial, we're already knocking a half an hour, and I only got the roof and the brick done. Like I said, this is a slow process. You need you need to be prepared for that, right? There's a lot of detail work, right? Picking out the nitty gritty, making sure everything is selected, everything is taken care of. All right, so let's call that brick complete. Like I said, for the sake of the video, we'll speed this up and we will get into the siding here. All right, and right now I'm just gonna actually I'm not gonna select these tops only because I've been down this road before. I know how this is gonna go. All right, so we'll just take just those sides there. Now, this is something, since it wraps all the way around all four sides, this is something that you may want to grab a seam, mark a seam on it. So when you unwrap it, it has a break in it and it unwraps in one piece. Okay, let's see what we got here. Let's unwrap that. It's a bit big, so let's scale that out. A lot of times, if I can, since it's hard to know how far you scaled one object compared to another, right? So, like, if I need to continually scale things, like I'm going to have to rescale this top also. What I try to do is I try to scale it out so it fits that entire block. So when I need to scale something else, I have a reference, right? I just scale that object out to the edges of, this texture block. And then it usually gets me in the ballpark. I'm usually pretty close. All right, I'm going to do these individually. You can see how this already scaled itself up to that block, but unfortunately it's a little bit small, but luckily enough I have to go in with it. So that won't be too hard to get up to the to get those to match. That looks a little big maybe. What you want to do is I'm trying to line it up so one of these lines here, first let me get the height right. Right. And all I'm doing when I say height, I'm making sure this panel is about the same size. I'm just eyeballing it. Okay, now it's going to create kind of an obvious seam right here between the two textures. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to move this up or down, right? And I'm going to try and get that seam as close as I can to that edge right there. There we go. There you go. And it doesn't look too bad. Now, this texture is a little bit darker than I would normally work with. I would normally work with a lighter material, right? Something white or, aesthetically have it look good aesthetically, right? So all the colors go together, everything looks nice. Like I said, for the sake of this tutorial, I'm just kind of going with whatever I have available. Oops. All right, we'll stick with that. Like I said, I just want to speed this up here because things are going a little bit slower. All right, now your windows here are a bit of a different story. Okay, so there's different ways that you can do this. So Giants does have a window material. All right, I don't want to explain this. It does have an alpha component to it, so you can see through it. And it depends on how you're working this, right? There's different ways. Like if you're working with like a house or something where you want to see inside, we do windows a bit differently. All right. I'm not going to cover that in this video because that takes time, takes a lot of time. Right. So that's a single video all in itself. Or your other alternative is to just color these windows, right? Give it a darker color so it basically looks like a window. All right. So we would actually give this a new material because it works off of a different texture atlas. So I'm just going to name that window. Okay. So I know what it is. And I'm going to go back into shading here and I'm going to pick I'm going to pick the textures that I want to be part of that window material. All right. Now I believe on here it's called industrial windows. Well, there is industrial and there might be a residential under the Alpine map or the French map. The Alpine, I believe, definitely has them past the eyes. So if you look here, you can see, man, I am just lost. Okay, here's the industrial windows, right? So we can pick these here. Let's pick these three. I believe I really think there might be a residential. I could be wrong, but I think there's a residential window also. Let's have a quick look here. Actually, you know what? I don't think it's a residential window. I think it's window treatments. They have curtains, and there's interiors and stuff like that. So let's go into textures under map Alpine, go down to windows. It's going to take a lot of rooting around in these folders to finally. Oh, so they do have a window glass. I'm right. So they have a window glass. They have like kind of like a daytime, nighttime. So they have it a one and a two on the window glass. So you can see this window glass two diffuse. And then there's curtains, there's an interior. Now, some of these objects are only available on certain maps, right? So all of these window treatments between the curtains, the interiors, and stuff like that, you can only find that on the Alpine map. Now, obviously, you can use that on any map that you want, but just know that these images only live in the Alpine folder. Okay, even if you look on the base game US map, you can see if you look at the addresses for these images, they're pointing back to the Alpine folder. All right. So some images, some textures just work that way. They only live in certain folders. And that's to avoid redundancy, right? So you don't want the same image to show up in every single folder, right? One for the US, one for the French map, one for the Alpine map, because now you have three copies of the same image and it adds unnecessary overhead to the game. So, right. So this is their way of keeping the resources low, right? So, eliminating the redundancy where you don't have so many uh, of the exact same texture in each folder. So you need to get used to the contents of the folders themselves, of what lives where, right? So spend some time browsing around in these texture folders, figuring out what textures are inside of there, and like I said, eventually you'll get used to it, and you'll know where to find certain items. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to use the industrial windows only because the reason I'm using the industrial windows is because they have that dark look to them, right? They don't have the residential windows have an alpha component where you can see through them. And that's not how I'm setting up these windows. I'm just setting up these windows so they just look a little dark. All right. So I'm going to click on window. I'm going to assign that to the window texture, go back into UV editing, and we're going to pick that window texture. We're going to move that into industrial window diffuse like so. All right. And we're just going to see a lot of these you're going to find that you end up having to do individually. Just like these, right? Just bear with me here. I think it's going to be, I'm not going to, I forgot what I was going to say. I'll end up not texturing this entire garage. I don't think it's going to be necessary for you to watch me, texture the entire thing, through to completion. Only because I think you get the idea of what's going on here, right? Of how to texture these things. Now, like I said, you don't have to worry about like overlap and stuff like that. Now, depending on the project, depending on what you're doing, sometimes that's very necessary. All right. That you got to watch your what they call islands. You can't have this face overlap with another face. So if you're baking your textures or you're sending this project over to Substance Painter, it becomes critical that these have no overlap. But for what we're doing here, okay, where we're just kind of telling it, a UV coordinate, like where in this texture, we want to pull that image from, overlap is no big deal, right? Since just with this style of texturing. So depending on your workflow, it is critical that you have no overlap depending on what it is that you're doing. I guess I should have included these insides here with my wall material there. No biggie though. Like I said, the next step here is I would get back into a residential material, my residential 01. Okay. And if I wanted to pick, like, say, my trim work here, all right, I'd move that down, scale it so it lives in there somewhere. Okay. So you can see how my sides are coming together here. All right. And I do that for every one of these, right? So unwrap them. Okay. Pick it, rotate it, move it down where you want it. Now, a lot of times I've seen people do this many different ways, right? So it's kind of up to you. So what you could do, experiment a little bit. So you can pick all your verticals like this, right? So pick all your vertical edges that you want to be white, unwrap those. Now you can see that you have them all facing in the right direction. Rotate 90, GY. Okay. Now I've seen people stack these ahead of time where they just pick the individual ones and they stack them one over top of another. Kind of up to you how you want to do it. There's a lot of different shortcuts, and as you get used to this, you're going to start discovering that there's easier ways to do some things. Like these textures here, I don't think it's critical that all of the detail comes out in it, especially with like a trim. Trim is just normally it's just like a color to me. You know what I mean? It doesn't have that much detail in it. I'm not really looking for a bunch of detail in my trim. As long as it looks white, I'm good with that. Right. So you don't have to fuss over all of this. So you want to grab these, unwrap them. Okay. And you can see how sometimes they get pretty big, but it's not a big deal for the trim. Like I said, I don't want to, I'm not looking for a massive amount of detail on my trim. You can see, and it looks fine, right? No biggie. Everything looks really good there. All right. So I'm knocking 40 minutes here, and I'm hoping from what we did here, you kind of get the gist of what's going on. All right. Very easy to do. Make sure that you're navigating your base game folders and, well, not navigating, you're just exploring them to figure out what textures live where. Just about everything is available. All right. So even this, I think there's a garage doors, there's a door set. Now the garage doors they're very limited to what you have. Okay. So at some point you may want to either, import your own texture or create your own texture. And we're going to go over that. I'll show you how to make your normal maps, your diffuse, your specular, all that stuff. I'll show you how to get all that stuff together. If you're interested in your own texture, we're going to go over that. That's going to be in a future video. I'll show you how to do that. There's different applications you can use for it. Sometimes it can be done through Blender. I do use a program called Materialize. Obviously, I use Adobe products, whether that's Photoshop, Substance Painter, or there's another Substance program. I can't remember what it is. It's pretty amazing though. All Adobe products, as far as I'm concerned, are fairly amazing. They do a really good job. Okay, but for this workflow here, I use it pretty often. Now, if I was to take this garage, now the garage is fairly simple, so it may not be that bad to throw in a Substance Painter. Sometimes I have to break it down and I have to texture it in pieces in Substance Painter. Sometimes, it all depends. But this workflow, exactly what we're doing here with the atlases and et cetera, I use it often. All right. It's like I said, it's a little bit slow, it's a little bit tedious, but it gets the job done. In the end, it looks good. You have no problems. And it matches everything inside of your map because you're using all of Giant's textures. Okay. So everything looks pretty good. You have your specular maps are already made. Your normal maps are already made. There's really not much that you have to do with this. Now, let's just pretend that I textured all of this, right? So I figured out, what textures go where. Everything's getting ready to be exported. This bottom piece here, by the way, I left as a concrete runner. And I do that often because when you're trying to set this on your map, uh, it's sometimes, if your ground's not even, my ground is rarely flat. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. If I'm trying to put a building down, I usually make it flat, but this helps cover you a little bit. This little bottom runner, I'll give it a concrete material, and most times that's going to be sunken down into my terrain and you won't see it. But just in case you have an uneven spot on your terrain, that's you're not going to be able to see under the house or through the house or the garage or anything like that. You're going to see the concrete that's below it. So that's why that is there. And that I would give a concrete texture. Now, what you would want to do is each one of your objects. All right. So we only have one object here. It's not each one of your materials, it's each object. And we only have the cube here. We only have this garage. The next step I would do is I go down here to where it says data, click on that, go to UV maps, and give it one additional UV map. Now you should have UV map 001. All right. Now make sure you go back into your UV editing workspace. All right. And either down here, just reassign, just click this UV map again, or up here in your UV workspace, get yourself back onto the correct UV map. Because you'll see what will happen here. Like say if I wanted to do this garage door, right? So I could unwrap that and say I want to give it a texture of like a shingle look or even this siding. You'll see that nothing changed, and you're going to run into this problem where you're trying to do this and you're moving this around, nothing's changing. You're pulling your hair out, you're cursing at your computer, smacking yourself or the computer, whatever you're doing. And the whole problem there the whole time is you're not on the correct UV map. You probably have an additional UV map because you want to work with parallax occlusion. Now that's why I had you put that extra map there. That's for parallax occlusion, right? If you want to use height maps or do anything with that, that's why we created that additional UV map. Okay. Just make sure that you get yourself back onto the correct UV map or you're not gonna see any of these changes like you see here. Okay. All right. So that's that. Next thing that you would do is make sure that your origin point is someplace where you want it, right? It's not, if it's hovering up here in the middle, when you export this in the Giants editor or import it in the Giants editor, uh, if your origin point is up here in the middle of the house where it is by default, when it imports in, your house is going to be buried halfway underneath the terrain, right? And we don't necessarily want that. As a matter of fact, I mean, I guess I can show you how all this works. Uh, Another thing that you want to do, we went over this, I think, in another video, is checking for any spare, and usually you do this before you texture. You want to clean it up, right? So you want to get rid of any extra faces or edges or vertices or anything that doesn't belong or you can do without because it only adds to your geometry. So you want to clean up your mesh as far as that goes. Get rid of all those extra edges and stuff that you don't need. Then you go into your texturing. You want to get yourself into. I used alternate X, but that for me that's a shortcut. What I'm doing is I'm going up here to this overlays, and if you go down bottom here, you'll see where it says face orientation. Okay. Clicking that off and on shows you which direction your normals are facing. If any of those are red, you're not going to be able to see that once it gets in the Giants editor. It'll be invisible basically. I know a couple of you guys have already run into this problem. You're able to see right through your model once you get in the Giants editor, and that's why, because you had your face orientation is facing the wrong direction. Now, if for some reason you find that one of yours are facing the wrong direction, this again I have mapped to a shortcut, but you would select that face, and I believe it's alternate N, and then that brings up your normals, and then you just go to flip, F for flip. Okay. You could also, I'm not sure where it is up top here. Somewhere up top here, you can also flip up here. Here we go, normals, right? So you can flip it this way. So if you go to mesh normals, you can flip that. All right. So I have mine also on a shortcut so I can just flip them very quickly, or I have a plugin that does it for me. But regardless, the point here is that you want to check the directions of your normals. They all have to be blue. Anything that shows up in red is going to be invisible once it gets into Giants Editor. Okay. So that's something to keep in mind. That's one of the last checks you want to make. So make sure all your textures look good. They're exactly where you want them. Okay. You have, nothing weird going on. You cleaned up your geometry. So any extra faces, vertices, edges that you don't need, you can clean all that stuff up. Like even little things like what I have going on here, like these edges here, I would get rid of these edges. I would dissolve those because they're not needed. Right. And it only adds to my geometry. When you look up top here, where am I at here? Right here. If you go back into your overlays, you can get your statistics up, and you can keep an eye on either faces, edges, vertices, whatever you look at. I look at triangles, but I'm at 1460, which is, yeah, for this garage, it's not bad, not bad at all. Um, Models can get pretty big. I got a couple that are upwards of 50,000, but they're very, very complex models. The name of the game here is to keep everything, the geometry as low as possible, right? So you don't want to have thousands and thousands of triangles because, as you work on your map, you're going to be including more and more items, and it's eventually you're going to take a performance hit. All right. So you need to think proactively and think ahead of the game, and from your very first model, try to keep everything as low as possible, right? So when you get them all together, you're not taking that performance hit, right? So even things like doors, and this is my downfall, right? Is doors and windows, they don't need all this extra work I put into this, right? All this extra geometry does not need to be here. This detail work is not necessary. The only reason I do it this way is because I'm using a texture. One, I'm using a texture for the window, right? And then I would come through and I would just, this framework here, right? The frame of the window itself, I'm giving it either, a texture, one of these textures over here, or I'm just giving it a color, right? So I would take these, rotate it, bring that down, scale it. Okay. So I'm doing something like that, but it's not necessary. If you look at my map here, right? I got some apartment buildings that I made here. All right. So if you look at those doors and those windows, they look just fine. There's nothing wrong with those. All right. Well, these windows here are just a flat. That's a texture, right? They're just completely flat. It's just one square flat face. I didn't have to put all that extra work into it. Same thing with the door. This is a Giants texture here. No, there's no doorknob. I should have gave it a doorknob, which I didn't yet. But these aren't actually 100% complete either, so that's fine. Point being is I didn't have to put all that extra detail and stuff in there. Now, this is one of the very first models that I did, and you can tell by looking at this model, I got like 45,000 vertices in there, right? Or 40,000 triangles, which is, it's on the larger side for this apartment. I guess for an apartment, it may not be. Um, but you can tell it looked pretty good. And a lot of it is like the detail work when I get into like these railings and stuff in the back. And uh, there's a lot of geometry here. But the point being, right, is that these doors here, like all of your doors and windows, you can get by just fine with just a texture. Okay. And that's all that I have going on with these windows and doors, just a texture, and they look just fine. So think ahead, think of what you're going to be doing. Like, what is your end goal? What do you have in mind? You might be able to get away with not having all this additional geometry. It's not necessary. It's not needed, depending if you have the textures available and what you're going to do. All right. And in a future video, I will show you high poly versus low poly. All right. So what we can do is, and I just did this recently, is I built just a drum. It was a barrel. It was a 55-gallon drum I needed for my map. Let me see if I can find that here somewhere. All right. So I had this drum that I needed, have it laying down here. Okay. So what I did is I built the high poly version of this drum. Now the high poly version came out to, I don't know, 1500, 2000, 2500, whatever it was. It was a high count, a high poly count for your geometry. For just a drum, it's a bit too much, right? You wouldn't want all that for just a simple drum. And where did that overlay come from? I forget how I turned that off and on. Yeah, well, it's gonna have to stay there for now. But anyhow, so what you could do is the high poly versus low poly is I built a high poly version and I built a low poly version, right? So this low poly is nothing but a simple cylinder. That is it, right? So there's nothing else going on with that, and it looks pretty good. It looks decent. The reason I did this is I found one on the Mod Hub, and it was a rusty drum, and I was looking for it, and the poly count was higher than what I would. Well, I don't know if the poly count was really that high actually. It just didn't look good. And I'm thinking, my God, I mean, I knew I could do a better job than that. But anyhow, I built a high poly model. And when I created my normals and my textures, I created those normals using the high poly and then I applied them to a low poly. Right. So in the end, my drum, my high poly drum, that was 2000, 2500 faces, gets me down to about 148. Right. So very simple. It really, really, and that's a very good number. Like 148 is extremely good for a drum or any product, any item for that matter. So these are little things to keep in mind, right? These are things that I'm gonna show you as we go along. Stuff like that, like using a high poly model to base your normal maps and stuff on. I don't want to say it's advanced, but it's a little bit ahead of what we're doing here, but it's just the point being to keep things in mind how you want to do things, right? That all this unnecessary geometry, you may want to avoid that, right? Just like that drum, I had something in mind. I didn't want just a simple drum to have, be excessively big. And it seems like a lot of stuff that you're finding on the Mod Hub is that way, right? So people learn just a little bit, just enough to be dangerous, right? So they figure out how Blender works, they figure out how to apply a texture, and next thing you know, they're putting out these super huge models that are undoubtedly going to slow down your map. If you have too many of them on there, if there's objects that I've come across in game where if you keep your frame rate up, on your like somewhere in your game, like on your viewport, if you have your frame rate showing, just getting close to some objects, you can see your frame rate drop. It's because of that object. It's sucking up all the resources and it's slowing you down. All right. So these are things to keep in mind when you're building things like this. You want to keep things as low as possible while still having them look good. And there's a lot of tips and tricks and different things you can do to still have things look good and have the poly count be low. Like I said, this is one of my, I don't know, I don't want to call it my weaknesses, but I do this a lot. Is I add the unnecessary detail, but it depends again what you have in mind. Now, the windows and textures that I showed you on that apartment building that I had there, right? That's a texture. Now, depending on how I'm working now, let me get myself back over here. I have a house somewhere in here that I just did the windows. Okay. So if you look at this house here, right? And this I textured this house the exact same way we just did. All right. So my windows, I can see into the windows. I can view it at different angles and the perspective changes and stuff like that. That's the reason I put the extra detail on my windows, because with a normal what I just showed you on that apartment building, just using a normal image for your window will not help you with transparency or anything like that. All right. So there's two different ways that you can do your windows. So if you're not interested in having your windows light up at nighttime and be able to see through them, and you just want to give them like that darker color look like we have here, right? You can get away with an image, just a simple texture. Okay. And we will cover this, like I said, in a future video, showing you how to have your windows light up and be able to see through the windows and view the interior on the other side. There's different shaders involved. There's different techniques, different things we have to do. Okay. So what do you think? Do you think you got the handle on this whole texture atlas and just being able to UV unwrap things either piece by piece or as one big piece, however you need to do it, to be able to map that out to this atlas. And from here, it's just like I had showed you guys in the past. You just want to go to your Giants. This throw sorry, this is throwing me off. I got to get rid of this. Shift alternate R. That's what it was. Get rid of that. That the little window I had up there from NVIDIA was throwing me off. Uh, where was I? Bring up your Giants exporter. Make sure you have your items selected. All right. Pick the location wherever you want this to be. By default, it'll put it in the same folder where it came from. All right. And I have simple garage and I just set the location. And from there, once I have everything selected, I can just export selected. All right. And once you get everything exported, you're going to have to open that up in Giants Editor and straighten out all of your textures. Right. So things are going to be in different places. Probably what I'll do is beginning of the next video, maybe we will reapproach this. Maybe I'll finish this up in the meantime. And then I'll show you how to get the height map and stuff on there. I'm pretty sure I've already showed you that, but we'll just go over a few of these things one more time, just so I'm not dragging this video out. I'm coming up on an hour right now, so I'm quickly trying to wrap this up, and I want to get everything out there, all the information that I feel like these guys are going to need. I'm trying to get out there quickly as I can, but we'll go over this just a tiny bit in the next video. I'm not quite sure what we're going to do in the next video. I'll have to work on that. If the amount of time between my videos is any indication of how the future videos are going to be released, I have a lot of time to think about it. But anyhow, so I'm going to leave things right there. So hopefully that made sense. Practice, practice, practice. And also, please keep in mind, I've been fielding a lot of questions lately on my channel. If you guys are not subscribed, you're probably going to be on the bottom of the list. And it's only fair. It's not because I dislike you guys or anything like that. It's not for spite or try to get you to subscribe, but I have to figure out a way. It's only fair to give preference, to the people that subscribe and, I'll answer their questions first and then just work my way down the list. But you'd be amazed how many people are not subscribed and, they want me to email them stuff or, they're emailing me and with, you know, detailed questions that are not even subscribers. So it's asking a lot from me, when the bare minimum I ask from you is to just hit that subscribe button. Okay. Now, like I said, it'll get your questions answered a whole lot faster because it's not for spite. I do have that many questions I answer on a daily basis. So just keep that in mind, right? Even if you don't want to subscribe, you hate me, you hate my voice, I'm annoying, whatever it is, whatever your reason is for not subscribing, that's still okay. Absolutely okay. You will get your question, will most likely be answered. So far, I don't think I've not answered anybody. It just may take a little bit longer. Okay. Alrighty. So I'm going to leave things right there. And with that being said, I'm Bauer Brown, and I will see you on the next one.